Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm JC Owens, and this is Rock My World, episode 31, Stormtroopers of the New World Order. Now, some of you have likely heard of the National Defense Authorization Act and Section 224 of that act. For those who haven't, this thing would fuse the military-industrial complexes of the U.S. and Israel with the private tech sector and all these globalist corporations on Front Street. They've been doing it on Back Street for a long time, but Section 224 mandates the network integration and data fusion between the two militaries, which allows for the laying of the foundation for the global police force I've been warning for years that the globalist technocrats want. They've all been working towards this. We talked about how the world wars and all this geopolitical tension is, set up on purpose. They create these boogeymen in order to make the public nervous. And once they make the public nervous and scared and angry, people will go along with things a lot easier. Now, like I said, on Backstreet, the U.S. government, our police forces, have all been working with Israel since pretty much the beginning. But it's all been on Backstreet, right? For the most part, we don't talk about how the Israeli Defense Forces have been training with our police forever, and how that contributes to the militarization of our own U.S. police, state by state, right? But this alliance that between U.S. and Israel this time puts it very much on Front Street and makes it a fully legal, full on, authorized thing. It prioritizes joint R&D, explicitly targeting AI, quantum computing, anonymous systems, as well as cyber and bioconvergence. By doing this, they bypass the traditional regulatory checks, and plug themselves directly into the state system, right? Themselves being the tech giants, right? The globalists are going to be able to be 100% integrated into our military more than they ever have before. But more importantly, this just begins to lay that foundation for that global police force I was talking about. This has been a plan that they've had for a long time. It's not just a one world, global governance system, but it's also a one world military, a one world religion, a one world police force. They want the whole thing, coming back to this central hub. You'll see that fusion centers that were birthed out of things like 9/11 and the Patriot Act and all this, they had already begun fusing all of our law enforcement agencies and intel agencies and stuff into one thing. Yes, on the surface they still seem different, but they're actually not. Just our CIA and MI6 and Mossad, and as well as its elite units like Unit 8200, have all basically been one entity and functioned as one entity since their foundation. World War II came along, and we got together with the British and basically created what we know as the CIA today. It began as the Office of Strategic Services, and eventually became the CIA and all these other agencies we see today. But the OSS was definitely its beginning, and it was made up of academics from what we now call the Ivy League system, right? Some of these high up academics got together in a little round table group of their own, and came up with a lot of this stuff. Founded all of our intel agency networks based on the more ancient intel networks that the Vatican, the Venetian bankers, and governments like the British Crown all used, right? They copied them and then just brought them up to modern day. Now, this is largely something that the public isn't aware of. They know that these agencies work together, but they're not fully aware of just how integrated they are. Like, there really is no division when you really get into looking at them. They do absolutely function as one entity, and this whole deal would just make it worse. You know, the globalist weapons makers already use Israel as a test ground for all of their newest equipment. This is where, like, if you're going to test some area denial weapon, like these little 5G dishes that will microwave you from a distance and disperse a crowd, they test that there. These are perfect test beds for their weapon systems and things. And this is just one aspect of how they already work together. As I mentioned earlier, the IDF and our police have been training together for decades at this point. You'll notice that our police all over the United States have been militarizing like since the 90s, and this training with the Israeli Defense Force is a big part of that. You'll see that these places like Israel, like China, like Iran, are places that the globalists use to test things like this. You can't get away with testing them here in the West so easily because we have laws that prevent it. So what do? Well, they help overthrow some of these nations back in the day and turn them into tyrannical, awful places. That way they can get away with doing these things. They can move their corporations over there and they can pay them nothing and get away with it. This is how just another example of how capitalism and communism work together. They work together to make things happen, to bring us to this global system, right? So long story short, don't let them fool you with this. Don't let them trick you by getting you emotional and scared. The same people that are behind our government are also behind these other governments like Iran and China and North Korea and Russia. They set these governments up to act as proxies, just like as our governments act as proxies for the globalist technocrat agenda. They want this so bad they can taste it, and they've been working on it for 150 years at least, as you will have seen if you've read the books in my reading list. The likelihood of them just giving up is zero, folks. They have committed too much time, effort, money, etc. to give it up now. They won't just let us protest and vote our way out of it. But either way, I think I'll stop it there for today. Much love, and peace out.